She didn't rush. She didn't cut in line. She didn't make a scene. Danielle stood exactly where she was supposed to be, right beneath the sign marked First Class, Priority Access. Her navy blue slacks were sharp, her blouse tucked in with quiet confidence, her carry-on polished leather. One hand held her passport, the other, a boarding pass. The woman at the gate barely glanced at either. Instead, she gave Danielle a once-over and motioned to the far end of the terminal without breaking her stiff little smile. Economy's boarding through the other line. It wasn't a question. Danielle blinked, not in confusion, but with the steady patience of someone who'd been through this before. She held the ticket up slightly, the seat assignment clear. 2A. First class. Not business. Not premium economy. First. The gate agent didn't bother looking again. She just shifted her weight, leaned slightly over the counter, and this time said it louder, so the rest of the boarding area could hear. This line is for priority passengers only. And just like that, everything got still. Not silent, but still. The kind of stillness that creeps into the air when everyone in a space collectively decides to pretend they are watching. But they are. A man in a suit tilted his head. A mother with a stroller paused mid-sentence. And somewhere to the right, someone muttered under their breath, "Seriously?" Danielle heard it. All of it. She always did. She didn't yell, didn't explain herself. She just stood there, passport in one hand, the boarding pass in the other, because she didn't have to move. The ticket had her name, the seat was hers, and she was exactly where she belonged. But somehow, that was the problem. Not the gate agent's scanner, not the system, not an overbooked flight. No, it was her presence, a black woman, traveling alone. Calm, dressed well but not flashy, first-class ticket, JFK to San Francisco, and that combination? Apparently it didn't make sense to everyone. The agent said nothing else, just waited, as if expecting Danielle to take the hint and step aside. Instead, Danielle took a slow breath, and then something shifted in her expression. Not anger, not defeat. Something closer to, "All right, let's see how this plays out." Because what no one around her realized, what the two women behind the gate hadn't even bothered to consider, was that Danielle Carter wasn't just a passenger. She wasn't on vacation. She wasn't flying on someone else's miles. She wasn't the guest of some VIP. She was the CEO of one of the fastest-growing fintech companies in the country. She wasn't just flying first class. She helped build the infrastructure this airline now used. The tech, the systems, the seamless check-ins and automated baggage. Her company helped design them. But none of that mattered in this moment, because in this moment, all they saw was her skin. And that mistake was going to cost them more than a missed scan. Stick around, because what happened next didn't just flip the entire situation. It exposed something a whole lot bigger. If you're new to this channel, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from viewers around the world. Danielle Carter's story didn't start with a corner office. It didn't start with million-dollar valuations or invitations to speak at global tech conferences. It began in a narrow, one-bedroom apartment tucked behind a laundromat in southwest Atlanta. An apartment where the heater rattled in the winter and the AC barely worked in the summer. Her mother, Janice, held it all together with the kind of quiet strength that never made the news. She worked back-to-back shifts, mornings at the hospital, helping patients in ways the doctors barely noticed, and nights scrubbing floors no one cared to walk across respectfully. Every dollar she made went toward rent, groceries, and Danielle's school supplies. Nothing extra. No safety net. Danielle never saw her mom take a day off. She never heard her complain. But she did hear her pray. Every night. They didn't have much, but they had rules. One of them? You don't wait for someone to hand you a chance. You make your own. And Danielle did. While other kids rode bikes and watched cartoons after school, Danielle sat cross-legged on the cracked tile floor with broken radios and busted calculators, prying them open to see what was inside. She didn't have kits or manuals. Just curiosity and a pile of secondhand tools from a church giveaway. The first time she touched a computer, she was 9, a dusty, donated desktop in the corner of the local library. The keys stuck, the monitor flickered, but Danielle treated it like it was gold. She taught herself to type. Then she taught herself to code. HTML, CSS, JavaScript, line by line. No courses, no mentors. just a girl with borrowed time on an aging machine. Sometimes, the librarians would forget she was still there. She stayed until the lights dimmed and the staff politely asked her to leave. Then she'd walk home, backpack zipped tight, one hand on her pepper spray. Another thing her mother couldn't really afford, but bought anyway. By 15, she'd built a prototype of her first budgeting app. It didn't look fancy, it didn't win awards, but it worked. And it was designed for the people no one else was designing for, single mothers who lived paycheck to paycheck, just like hers. By 18, Danielle was valedictorian of her high school. The local paper ran a tiny piece about her on page 4, squeezed between a car dealership ad and a grocery store coupon. There was no parade, no scholarships from big-name donors, no viral moment. Just a shy girl with a laptop held together by duct tape, ready to change the world in ways nobody had quite seen coming. College wasn't easy. She went to Georgia Tech, and even there, in the halls of innovation, she was one of the only black women in her computer science lectures. Professors called her "young lady" instead of her name. Internship interviews ended quickly when recruiters saw her face. Group projects turned into solo missions because no one trusted her to lead, until her work outperformed theirs. And when Danielle finally launched her fintech company, it didn't happen with champagne or venture capital buzz. It began at a folding table in the back of a co-working space. Just her, a few lines of code, and a handful of loyal users who found value in what she'd built. Over time, her app evolved. It started as a way to track spending, then it became a budgeting tool. Then it started offering financial education modules, specifically geared toward communities often excluded from the traditional banking system. Soon, banks started paying attention. Then the investors came. And then the media. Danielle's face was on magazine covers, she was profiled in business journals, she gave talks at universities, she shook hands with senators. But with all that visibility came something else. A strange kind of invisibility. The kind that followed her into restaurants where waiters handed the check to her assistant, into meetings where she was mistaken for the intern, into interviews where people asked her how it felt to lead a tech company, as if her leadership were an accident. She started noticing patterns, not overt, not loud, just quiet refusals to believe she belonged in the rooms she entered. And sometimes it didn't matter how tailored her clothes were, or how many zeros were in her company's valuation, or how many lives her app had helped stabilize. To them, she was still Miss, not ma'am. Still you people, not your team. Still where's your boss, not how did you build this. And yet, she never stopped showing up. Because that's what her mother taught her. And that's what Danielle knew. No title, no company, no level of success could ever protect you from the assumptions made in the first 5 seconds. Danielle Carter wasn't new to the feeling. That quiet tension in the air the moment she walked into certain rooms, the shift in posture, the sudden silence, the pause before the fake smile. She knew what it looked like when someone had already decided who you were. When she stepped into luxury boutiques wearing designer shoes and carrying a structured leather bag. Still, the staff trailed behind her like shadows, silent, watchful, as if she might slip something into her purse and vanish before their eyes. It didn't matter that her credit card could handle anything in the store, maybe the entire store. What mattered was her skin. It was there in the tone. The way "can I help you" landed different, less welcoming, more watchful. She'd respond with a cool, "no thank you, just browsing," and move through the racks, pretending she didn't see them radioing in her location to someone across the floor. Then there were rideshare drivers. She'd order a car, the app would flash, "arriving soon." Then, cancel. And another. Cancel. Over and over, until she changed her profile picture to something less identifiable. Then the rides came faster. Hotels? Danielle had stayed in 5-star suites on 3 continents, but she still saw the way the front desk staff would glance down at her reservation, then up at her face, then back again, as if the system had made an error. Once in Paris, a concierge casually asked if she was in the correct lobby. She looked him dead in the eye and replied, "No, I'm in the executive one." In corporate spaces, it was more subtle, but no less pointed. She'd walk into boardrooms in a sleek blazer, portfolio in hand, laptop under her arm, ready to present strategies that would move millions of dollars. And still, they'd turn to her co-founder, the younger white guy she'd hired fresh out of grad school, and ask him to explain the roadmap she had built. Her own company, her own software, her own deck. It never stopped. The worst part? People around her, colleagues, clients, even friends, didn't always notice. They didn't feel the weight of the glances. They didn't hear the slight change in voice pitch. They didn't recognize the double takes in the elevator. To them, it was invisible. To her, it was constant. 1,000 cuts. None deep enough to bleed on their own, but together, they scarred. Still, Danielle never lost her composure. She had mastered the art of straightening her spine just slightly taller when someone tried to shrink her. She responded to shade with success. And when she was underestimated, she let the results speak first. But that day at the airport, it wasn't just a glance. It wasn't a cold, "Can I help you?" It was loud. It was public. It was direct. She was flying from New York to San Francisco to speak at a tech conference. First-class ticket, booked weeks in advance. Checked in, cleared security, and arrived at the gate early, just like she always did. She was wearing navy blue slacks, a crisp blouse, low heels, and subtle gold studs. Elegant, polished, professional, a CEO traveling like a CEO. But the moment she approached the first-class boarding lane, the gate agent's eyes narrowed. Her body stiffened. Her smile was tight. Forced, and then came the line. That line Danielle had heard versions of all her life. Economy's that way. No greeting, no glance at the ticket, just a command and an assumption. Danielle raised her eyebrows, calmly lifting her boarding pass. The letters "First Class" clearly printed on top. The agent didn't budge, didn't apologize, didn't even look embarrassed. She just nodded toward the general boarding area again and repeated, louder this time, "This lane is for priority passengers only." And just like that, the air around them shifted. People turned. Some stared, some looked away. A few reached for their phones, not to record, but to pretend they weren't witnessing something ugly. Danielle stood her ground, not because she was trying to cause a scene, but because she'd learned, a long time ago, that silence never changed anything. So she repeated herself, "This is my seat. I paid for it. May I board?" What she did next would shake the entire airline to its core. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from viewers around the world. The tension thickened as Danielle stood at the gate, her grip tightening around the edge of her boarding pass. It wasn't just the blatant questioning of her presence in first class that unsettled her. It was the underlying assumption that her status, her success, and even her very identity were out of place. As the first agent walked away, leaving the situation unresolved, another gate agent, a younger woman, perhaps in her late 20s, stepped forward, taking her ticket with a faint, almost rehearsed smile. She glanced down at the details, then her eyes flicked back up to meet Danielle's. But instead of simply confirming the ticket, she typed something into the system with exaggerated focus. Danielle noticed the pause, a subtle hesitation, the hint of a smirk that followed. It wasn't an innocent mistake. It wasn't even a slip-up. No, it was something deeper, something more ingrained. "Are you sure this isn't your husband's ticket?" the agent asked, as if it were the most casual question in the world. Danielle's breath caught in her chest, but she didn't flinch. She couldn't afford to. Her response was calm, but the weight of it hung in the air. "Excuse me," she asked, her tone controlled, sharp. "Oh, just making sure. It's a common mistake," the woman added, waving a hand dismissively, as if the situation were nothing more than a trivial misunderstanding. Danielle knew better. This wasn't a mistake. The ticket had her name. Her loyalty status was clearly marked, her TSA pre-check ID, her SkyMiles number. Everything was in order. Nothing was wrong, except the assumption that she didn't belong. The agent didn't seem to notice, or maybe didn't care, as she returned her focus to the screen. The way she had asked the question, like it was nothing, like Danielle hadn't just proven her credentials with her own eyes, spoke volumes. This wasn't about confusion. It was about an unspoken belief that someone like Danielle didn't deserve the perks or privileges of that first-class seat. Danielle stood there in the silence that followed, her mind processing everything at once. She was a seasoned businesswoman, someone who had fought and clawed her way up from nothing. She had earned every inch of the seat she was standing in. But none of that seemed to matter to the woman behind the counter. What mattered was the unspoken bias that had been ingrained in the way the world saw her, and it wasn't going to be the first time it would show up today. She could feel eyes on her, the silent judgment of the crowd behind her who still hadn't fully grasped what was unfolding. They saw the back and forth, the awkward glances, the hesitation. Some even looked away, pretending not to notice. But Danielle knew better. She knew this was a pattern, something she had experienced time and again. As the second agent clicked away at the system, Danielle's mind was already racing. The microaggressions that had piled up over the years, the dismissive comments, the questions about her qualifications, the assumptions about her place, had all been building to this. And now, standing in front of the gate agents who were treating her like an imposter, Danielle knew she had a choice. She could walk away and accept the treatment as just another part of being a black woman in a world that made her prove herself every day. Or she could stand her ground, let the world see what had been happening in the shadows for far too long, and demand that it stop. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Another text from her assistant, just checking in after the meeting. But Danielle didn't look at it. She didn't need the distraction. This moment, this confrontation, was bigger than any meeting, any investment. It was about her right to exist in a space she had earned, without being questioned. With a controlled breath, she pulled her phone from her bag and unlocked the screen. Her fingers hovered over the apps, but she didn't go to social media or email. No, this wasn't the time for public responses. This wasn't something she needed to post about. It was something she needed to resolve. Her fingers slid down to her contacts list. She had a direct line to Eric Moore, Senior Vice President of Operations for North America at the Airline. It was a connection she had made 6 months ago at a tech roundtable, where she had been one of the only women, let alone black women, in the room. The event had been a pivotal moment for her. She had spoken candidly about the state of tech innovation in the airline industry. Eric had listened. Later that day, he had signed off on a deal to integrate her company's cutting-edge system for automating baggage tracking and gate analytics. It had been one of her biggest wins. Her work was shaping the future of this airline, making their operations more efficient and modernizing the way passengers experience travel. But this moment, this was different. It wasn't about the system overhaul. It wasn't about business. It was about her right to exist in a space she had earned. And now, Danielle was going to make sure someone at the top knew just how wrong the situation was. Her finger found Eric's name in her contacts list, and without a second thought, she pressed call. The phone rang twice before he picked up. Danielle? All good with your flight? Eric's cheerful voice greeted her, unaware of the storm she had just weathered. She didn't hesitate. Not exactly, she replied, her tone calm but firm. Your team at JFK seems to think I don't belong in first class. The line went silent for a long moment. No surprise, no immediate response, just the weight of her words settling between them. Then finally, Eric spoke, his voice tight. Give me 60 seconds. Danielle's body remained tense as she stood there, waiting. She didn't engage with the gate agents, didn't argue. She had already made her point in her own way. This wasn't about raising her voice. It was about standing firm in the face of bias. She let them stumble through their stalling tactics, each moment adding to the sense of indignation that had been brewing inside her. The seconds ticked by, the quiet murmurs of the passengers behind her growing louder as the tension in the air thickened. She could feel the eyes on her, the whispers, the side glances. But she didn't flinch. Then it happened. 2 men in suits approached the gate with a sense of urgency, their brisk strides cutting through the crowd. Danielle didn't need to see their faces to know who they were. One of them was the regional manager. The other was Eric Moore himself. He had kept his word. The gate agents, who had once been so confident in their scrutiny, now looked like children caught in a lie. Their shoulders stiffened, their eyes darting nervously as Eric and the regional manager made their way through the crowd, their steps purposeful. Eric didn't yell. He didn't have to. His presence alone was enough to command the room. The murmurs died down as the 2 men reached the gate. Eric's voice was steady, controlled, yet loud enough for everyone in the boarding area to hear. May I see your boarding pass? Danielle didn't hesitate. She handed it over without a word. knowing this was a moment of finality. She watched as Eric scanned it, his eyes flicking to the details. The confirmation was immediate. There were no errors, no mistakes. He didn't take his eyes off the gate agents as he turned to face them. His voice rang out, firm and unyielding. "You both just profiled one of our key tech partners and executive-level clients." The words hit hard. The older gate agent's face flushed bright red, her lips trembling as she struggled to maintain composure. The younger agent, who had smirked earlier, looked like she wanted to shrink into the floor, her face pale with shock and shame. Eric didn't pause. He didn't waste time on pleasantries or apologies. He was clear in his intent. "This is unacceptable." The regional manager, standing silently beside Eric, didn't seem surprised. He must have known exactly what was happening. Without another word, Eric gestured for the two agents to step away from the desk. He didn't fire them on the spot, but the weight of his words was a punishment in itself. They had been exposed, their actions laid bare for everyone to see. As Eric led them away from the gate, a third staff member, one who hadn't been involved in the incident, quickly took over. Danielle stood tall, not looking back. She could feel the eyes of the other passengers on her, but she didn't care. She walked down the jet bridge with a quiet confidence, the subtle power in each step cutting through the tension that had been left behind. The silence that followed was profound. The people behind her, who had witnessed everything unfold, said nothing. There was no applause, no cheers, but there didn't need to be. The message had been sent loud and clear. Danielle didn't need validation from anyone. She knew what had just happened wasn't just about this flight. It wasn't just about her personal experience. It was about the quiet, everyday racism that so many had suffered in silence. Today, though, things had shifted. She had taken action. She had used her voice and her position to demand accountability, and she had won. Later that evening, once she had arrived in San Francisco and settled into her hotel room, Danielle sat by the window, looking out over the city's skyline. The day had unfolded in a way she hadn't expected, but she knew the impact of what had just transpired was far greater than the moment itself. She pulled out her phone, scrolling through the barrage of notifications she had received since boarding the plane. But she didn't need the validation. She had already taken a stand. What she needed was to articulate the deeper truth of what had happened. It wasn't just about her. It wasn't just about the racist encounter with the gate agents. This was about something bigger, a pattern of microaggressions, bias, and the systemic hurdles that Black women in particular are forced to navigate. She decided to post about the incident. But Danielle wasn't looking for revenge. She wasn't interested in calling out the airline by name or demanding anyone's job. Instead, she crafted a message that was quiet, powerful, and deliberate. The world still expects Black women to prove themselves, even after they've already made it. Some people don't see your worth until someone else validates it, but I won't shrink to fit their expectations. I belong here. She hit post and sat back, watching as her words began to spread. The post went viral. Within hours, thousands of comments poured in. Many echoed the sentiment of frustration, outrage, and disbelief. But more importantly, there was a sense of resonance. People saw themselves in Danielle's words. They recognized the subtle, insidious nature of the discrimination she had experienced, and they shared their own stories. Black women, in particular, began commenting, recounting their own encounters, times when they had been dismissed, overlooked, or questioned, despite being the most qualified person in the room. But it wasn't just Black women. People of all backgrounds shared their experiences of being judged based on their appearance, of being made to feel invisible, less than, or out of place because of their race, gender, or socioeconomic status. Danielle's story wasn't just her own. It was the story of every person who had ever been told they didn't belong. Every person who had been placed in the wrong line, the wrong room, the wrong seat, simply because of how they looked. Every person who had to fight harder, prove more, and still found themselves fighting an uphill battle despite their accomplishments. In that moment, Danielle realized that the true impact of her actions wasn't in the confrontation at the airport. It wasn't in the way Eric Moore had stepped in and corrected the gate agents. It was in how her story, her voice, resonated with people. It was the understanding that even in moments of subtle injustice, there is power in standing your ground. Power in refusing to be silenced. Power in not shrinking to fit the expectations of others. The messages, the stories, the outpouring of shared experiences, they weren't just about what had happened at that gate. They were about the larger fight for equality, respect, and recognition. They were about all the invisible battles that people fought every day, simply for the right to exist as their authentic selves. And for Danielle, that realization was the most powerful of all. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for all the others who had felt the sting of being underestimated, ignored, or marginalized. As the night wore on, the comments continued to flood in. But Danielle felt a sense of peace. She had done more than just address a personal grievance. She had sparked a larger conversation, one that needed to be had, one that needed to be heard. In the end, her message was clear. She wouldn't shrink to fit anyone's expectations because she already belonged. And in that truth, there was power, not just for her, but for anyone who had ever been told they didn't. Danielle didn't crush them with anger. She crushed them with truth, with excellence, with the kind of grace that doesn't ask permission to exist, the kind that walks into a room and makes the room catch up. And that's what people often forget. You don't need to shout to make your presence felt. You don't need to shrink to fit into a space that was never meant for you. Sometimes your very presence speaks louder than any words, any confrontation, any challenge. You just need to keep showing up. Keep rising. Keep fighting. Not for validation, but for the simple fact that you belong. Danielle knew that the battle she faced wasn't over. In many ways, it was just beginning. But she also knew that every time she stood her ground, every time she made her presence known, she was chipping away at the walls that had been built by prejudice, racism, and bias. Every time she rose, she was making it a little easier for the next person to do the same. So, the next time someone questions where you belong, take a deep breath. Let your presence do the talking. Let your power speak louder than prejudice. Let your brilliance and grace lead the way. Because you don't need to prove anything to those who have already chosen not to see you. You just need to keep showing up and keep rising. And in the end, that's all that matters. If this story moved you, share it. And remember, these aren't isolated events. They're echoes of a system we need to challenge, one voice at a time. If you're new to this channel, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from viewers around the world.